Kale's preening ritual was a sacred duty. Each iridescent blue feather on his wings had to be aligned in perfect harmony with the golden filaments along his throat. Any deviation was a personal failing, a dishonor to the great Sky Father who had gifted them the celestial spire, the space elevator that was the beating heart of their civilization. He meticulously worked a polishing stone over a primary flight feather, the motion as ingrained as breathing. The spire was their entire world, a needle of carbon nanotubes stretching from the high-gravity surface of Ethel to the orbital ring far above. It was a monument to order, to caste, to perfection. And today, the lesser castes were making a terrible mess of it. Reports filtered in through his personal comms, a series of clipped, agitated reports from the lower levels. Unsanctioned gatherings. Unpredictable behavior from the bipedal mammals they had recently pacified. Insolent creatures, Kale muttered, his voice a sharp, melodic click. They had been conquered with such elegant, terrifying ease. The Sky Father's chosen warriors had descended in their gleaming skiffs, and the mammals had simply stopped. They had offered no resistance, no challenge. It had been a flawless campaign, a testament to the superiority of the Athelian caste system. Kale had personally overseen the annexation of their primary landing zone, a sprawling, chaotic city they called London. The mammals were crude, their architecture a jumble of sharp angles and dull colors, their fur a messy, unregulated brown. But they were broken, and that was all that mattered. He finished his preening, admiring his reflection in the polished surface of the spire's inner wall. Today, he would preside over the formal induction of the human workforce. They would learn their place. They would learn the beauty of order. He strode towards the central transit car, his movements fluid and precise, a living embodiment of the Athelian ideal. The chaos below was a temporary inconvenience, a stain to be scrubbed clean by discipline and example. The transit car was a silent, smooth cylinder of polished obsidian, its interior lit by soft, pulsing light that matched Kale's own plumage. He stood alone, his posture rigid, watching the numbers count down as the car ascended through the spire's levels. The lower levels were a mess of unfinished gray metal and crude, human-wrought modifications. The Athelians had permitted the humans to work the lower levels, their dense, strong bodies making them suitable for the heavy lifting their own slender forms were not built for. It was a practical arrangement, one that reinforced the caste structure. The humans were tools, and like all tools, they needed to be kept in their proper place. As the car ascended, the architecture shifted. The metal gave way to gleaming crystalline structures, to elegant archways and balconies where Athelians in vibrant, caste-specific plumages moved with silent grace. Kale felt a sense of peace settle over him. This was order. This was civilization. The car slowed, and the doors hissed open onto the promenade of ascension, a vast, open-air ring that encircled the spire halfway to the orbital ring. The view was breathtaking. The swirling, multi-hued clouds of Ethel below, the distant, glittering stars above. And there, on the polished floor, was the source of the day's agitation. A group of humans. Not working, not shuffling in quiet submission. They were gathered in a loose circle, and at the center of the circle was a human child, no older than a fledgling, sitting on the floor. Around the child were other humans, their faces a mixture of worry and determination. One of them, a large, male specimen with a mess of brown hair on his head, was kneeling beside the child, speaking in their guttural, barking language. Kale's feathers ruffled in irritation. This was a breach of protocol, a disruption. He glided forward, his shadow falling over the group. The humans looked up, their expressions unreadable. The large one stood, his posture tense but not aggressive. Kale addressed him in the basic trade tongue they had forced the mammals to learn. You are in a restricted area. Your labor shift ended 3 cycles ago. Disperse. The human just stared at him, his brown eyes unblinking. Then, he pointed a blunt finger at the child. Kale followed the gesture. The child was clutching its arm, its face contorted in pain. A thin line of dark red fluid was seeping through a tear in its rough, skin-like covering. A minor injury. Insignificant. Kale was about to repeat his command when the human spoke, his voice low and rough. He needs a healer. Now. Kale blinked. The request was so absurd, so far outside the established parameters, that for a moment, His mind refused to process it. Healers were for the worthy, for those who contributed to the spire. This child was a drain, a future laborer at best. Why expend resources on a damaged unit? He opened his beak to explain the cold, hard logic of their new reality, but the human cut him off, taking a step forward. I said now. The words were not a request. They were a demand. And in that demand, Kale saw something that chilled his blood. Not fear, not submission. A flicker of something primal, something that looked terrifyingly like defiance. Kale's first instinct was to call for the Skyguard. This human was challenging him, challenging the very foundation of Athelian rule. But something stayed his hand. It was the look in the human's eyes, the way the other humans had formed a protective wall around the child. They weren't cowering. They were standing their ground. It was an alien concept. Athelians did not protect the weak. The weak were culled, or they faded into obscurity. They did not become a focal point for defiance. Kale's rigid caste system had no place for this. He clicked his beak in frustration, a sound of displeasure that usually sent lesser castes scurrying. This human did not flinch. Your name, Kale stated, his voice colder now, a display of authority. The human's jaw tightened. John. John. Kale repeated, the name feeling strange and clumsy on his tongue. You will address me as Kale Skysinger. You will disperse this unlawful gathering. The child's injury is of no consequence. John's eyes narrowed. He's my son. The words hung in the air, meaningless and yet strangely potent. Kale had studied the humans. He knew they formed familial units, a primitive social structure that was inefficient and sentimental. He had dismissed it as a biological quirk, like their strange, hair-covered bodies or their inability to fly. But to hear it spoken with such conviction, it was as if John believed the injury of this small, insignificant creature was a personal affront to him. Kale felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Confusion. Your son? Kale asked, the words tasting foreign. Yes, my son. He needs a medic. Kale gestured dismissively towards a nearby station where a low-caste Athelian was performing routine maintenance. There is a sanitization unit 3 levels down. It can clean the wound. John's face hardened. That's not a medic. That's a scrub bot. He needs a real healer. Kale's patience was wearing thin. There are no healers for the uncast. The child has not yet contributed to the spire. Its life has no value. The moment the words left his beak, he saw the change in John. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a cold, terrifying stillness. John took another step, closing the distance between them. He was so much larger than Kale, a mountain of flesh and bone compared to his own elegant avian form. You don't get to decide that, John said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than any shout. Kale finally understood. This wasn't just about a wounded child. This was about a principle his entire civilization was built to reject. He had stumbled into the heart of the human paradox, and it was more terrifying than any weapon they had fielded. Kale stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to retreat. This human, John, was a force of nature, a chaotic whirlwind of emotion and illogical priorities. He had broken Kale's carefully constructed worldview with 2 simple words, my son. In the Athelian caste system, lineage was everything, but it was a lineage of purpose. A Skysinger's purpose was to sing the praises of the Sky Father and maintain the spire. A laborer's purpose was to serve. A child's purpose was to grow. The concept of a child having inherent value, of a parent's love being a reason to demand resources, was anathema to their orderly society. Kale had always seen such emotions as weaknesses, flaws in the lesser species. But looking at John's face, at the unwavering resolve in his eyes, Kale felt a crack form in the foundation of his beliefs. The child is a liability, Kale stated, though the words now felt hollow, even to himself. John's lip curled in a way that was almost a snarl. He's my liability, and I'll carry him myself if I have to. With that, John scooped the child into his arms. The child cried out, a sharp, pained sound, but John's grip was firm and gentle. He turned to the other humans, who had been watching in tense silence. You heard him, John said, his voice regaining its authority. We're going to the infirmary. The group of humans, a mix of males and females, fell into step behind John. They didn't look at Kale. They didn't need to. Their silent, unified presence was a declaration of war. Kale was being ignored. A skysinger ignored. It was unthinkable. He opened his beak to shout, to command them to halt, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed, a statue of polished feathers and confusion, watching these chaotic mammals march past him, defying the very laws of physics and society that he held sacred. They moved with a purpose he couldn't comprehend, a shared goal that transcended individual need. They were protecting one of their own. And in that moment, Kale realized the Athelians had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had conquered a people, but they had not understood them. They had seen tools, not a family. They had seen subjects, not a community. And now, that community was rising up, not with weapons, but with something far more dangerous, a shared, irrational love. The infirmary was a place Kale had only ever visited for formal inspections. It was a sterile, white-walled chamber filled with humming machinery and the quiet, efficient movements of mid-caste medics. It was a place of logic and repair, not of sentiment. John and his group marched straight in, their muddy boots leaving dirty prints on the pristine floor. A medic, a slender Athelian with green-tipped feathers, approached them, her head tilted inquisitively. "You are not scheduled for maintenance. This area is restricted." John ignored her, walking straight to the central diagnostic unit. He gently laid the child down on the cold, metal surface. The child whimpered. "He needs a real doctor," John said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The medic's feathers puffed up in annoyance. "I am a grade 3 biorepair technician. I am qualified to assess and repair all standard organic units. This unit's dermal laceration is minor. It will be processed." John's hand clenched into a fist. "He's not a unit. He's a boy, and he's hurting." The medic's beak opened slightly, a gesture of confusion. "The pain is a standard biological response to tissue damage. It is a warning system, not a condition to be treated beyond repair." Kale, who had followed the humans at a cautious distance, felt a familiar wave of irritation. The medic was speaking the truth. This was a waste of time. He stepped forward, ready to assert his authority and end this farce. "You heard the technician, John. The child will be processed. You will return to your designated labor sector." But John didn't even look at him. His focus was entirely on the medic. "You don't understand," John said, his voice low and intense. "He's scared. He's in pain. He needs someone to hold his hand while you fix him." The medic actually recoiled, as if John had suggested something profane. Physical contact is unsanitary and unregulated. It is not part of the repair protocol. John's face was a mask of disbelief. "You're going to just let him lie there and be scared?" The medic tilted her head, her logic-based mind unable to compute the question. "Fear is a chemical response. It will subside once the analgesic is administered." Kale watched the exchange, and a strange, new feeling began to stir in his chest. It was a feeling of pity? For the human? No, that couldn't be right. He was a skysinger. He was above such base emotions. But he couldn't deny the knot of unease tightening in his gut. These humans operated on a frequency he couldn't hear, a wavelength of emotion that was invisible to the Athelians. They saw a broken machine that needed fixing. John saw a scared child that needed comfort. And in that moment, Kale realized that the Athelians weren't just dealing with a different species. They were dealing with a different kind of consciousness altogether. Kale's comms chirped, an insistent, high-pitched tone that cut through the tense standoff in the infirmary. It was Lord Zephyr, his direct superior, a high-caste noble whose plumage was a breathtaking display of silver and gold. Kale felt a spike of anxiety. Zephyr did not tolerate failure or deviation. He answered the call, his voice carefully modulated to remain calm. "Kale Skysinger, report." Zephyr's voice was like ice, sharp and precise. "What is the meaning of the disturbance on the promenade? My sensors show a concentration of unauthorized life forms and a deviation from standard productivity metrics." Kale glanced at John, who was still locked in a silent argument with the medic. The other humans had formed a loose perimeter, their watchful eyes making the sterile infirmary feel crowded and threatening. "Lord Zephyr, I am handling a situation with the human labor force. There has been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Zephyr's voice was laced with disdain. "With mammals? There is no misunderstanding. They are simple creatures. They require clear, unambiguous direction. Your hesitation is a sign of weakness." The word weakness struck Kale like a physical blow. He was a sky singer. He was the embodiment of strength and order. The humans are refusing to disperse, Lord Zephyr. They are demanding medical attention for a non-essential juvenile. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched out, heavy with unspoken judgment. A juvenile? Zephyr finally said. And what is the status of this juvenile? Kale hesitated, glancing at the child on the table. The medic had finally administered a sedative, and the child was now quiet, his small chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. The juvenile is stable. The injury is minor. Then why are they not working? Zephyr demanded. Why are they wasting your time and mine with this sentimentality? The word was spat out like a curse. Kale felt a flush of hot shame. He was being questioned, and by a human, no less. They are protecting the child, Lord Zephyr. The male John, he calls it his son. He claims the child is his responsibility. Another pause, longer this time. When Zephyr spoke again, his voice was cold and final. The mammals are attempting to subvert our authority by appealing to your primitive instincts. They are testing the boundaries of their new reality. You will show them no weakness, Kale. You will use force if necessary. Reassert control. Now, or I will find a sky singer who can. The line went dead. Kale stood frozen, the weight of Zephyr's command pressing down on him. He looked at John, at the humans standing silently around him. They were not testing boundaries. They were living in a world he couldn't comprehend. He had a choice: obey the cold, logical order of his society, or step into the chaotic, terrifying unknown of human emotion. And for the first time in his life, Kale did not know which path was the right one. Kale made his decision. It was a betrayal of everything he had been taught, a violation of the sacred laws of caste and order. But as he looked at John's face, at the raw, desperate love in his eyes, Kale knew he could not follow Zephyr's command. He could not order the Skyguard to fire on these creatures. He would not be the one to unleash that kind of horror. He turned to the medic, his voice low and urgent. You, prepare the child for transport. Use the advanced diagnostic unit. I want a full analysis. The medic's feathers ruffled in surprise. Lord Zephyr's orders were clear. My orders are now clear. Kale cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. He was a sky singer. His authority was absolute. The medic, though clearly confused, bowed her head and scurried to comply. Kale then turned to John, who was watching him with a wary, guarded expression. The child will be transported to the orbital med station, Kale said, choosing his words carefully. It has better facilities. John's brow furrowed. The orbital station? That's for high-caste Athelians. Why would you do that? Kale felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. Because your son's life is more valuable than Lord Zephyr's pride. The words hung in the air, shocking even Kale himself. He had said the unsayable. He had defied the core tenet of their society. That value was determined by caste, not by life itself. John stared at him, his expression unreadable for a long,